Now, there we go. Well, we got it working now. Welcome to this episode of Communications and Cigars. I'm your host, John Crook, and welcome. We should have audio now. Sorry about that on there. You know, technicalities, right? We had even had a little issue updating it through YouTube tonight, which is kind of weird. Hopefully, we should be hearing some sound now. I don't know if people are still hearing it. No, yes, no, we're not yet. No, let's try one more time here. How about this? This any better? Can people hear me now? We better call tech support. Okay, there we go. Now we got it. Alrighty. Well, let's see. You know what? It wouldn't be a show about communications if we couldn't communicate ourselves, could we? So, anyways, welcome to this episode of Communications and Cigars. I am your host, John Crook, and yeah, wouldn't you know, right? So, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for joining us. We're on here usually Monday nights at 8 p.m. And we're going to be dealing with a topic I think that really can get some people in a bunch. And I'll say in a bunch. Let's just put it that way. And what we're going to be talking about tonight is these little things right here. And it's not a radio. Well, actually, it is a radio. Same thing with this one here, but it's not your conventional thought of radios. It's actually push to talk over cellular, sometimes called network radios, POC radios, PTToC radios on there. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight on Communications and Cigars. So as always, once again, now that you can hear me, my name is John Crook, as you are all aware. Welcome to my show with the topic of talking about communications, and we talk a little bit about cigars. Well, guess what? Surprisingly, I don't really have anything too much to talk about cigars tonight. Weather's going to get better for it. But before we dive into this, I think it's more important to say thank you to our sponsor and our email. So if you ever have questions about the show, feel free, communications-cigars at jjkcom.com. That's right, communications-cigars at jjkcom.com. JJK Communications is our sponsor for Communications and Cigars. And in addition, they are the ones who actually have these radios that we're going to be talking about tonight on there. They were the ones that were able to supply them for us. And that's what tonight's show is going to be a little bit about. So we're going to dive into the topic here. But once again, we meet every Monday night at 8 p.m. Central Time. And sometimes there might be situations where we might have a recorded episode, or we might actually skip a week or something, depending on what's going on here. But we wanted to have this tonight because you may have read something a little bit in the news a week or two ago about some issues with the cellular network. So that's what tonight's show is going to be. But as always, getting back to it, if you ever have questions, comments, ideas for the show, whatever, please feel free to go ahead and contact me at that email address. So let's dive right into it. Let's dive into this thing. And I think this is probably going to be a very controversial topic for the hammers out there. It's going to be a topic for business users of being like, yeah, okay, so what's the deal? But then there's some people that are aware of it, and some people that aren't aware of this kind of technology out there. And I think what's even more interesting about it is that those that are kind of like on the fence, they're going to gravitate to what they believe or what they think is probably the right answer. So let's go to how this topic came up for tonight. So about 2 weeks ago, AT&T had a service disruption, okay? Meaning that they had issues with being able to have network operations, okay, as normal. And I'm not going to go and dive into this because I'll tell you, there are some people that were like, I feel like my boat. Okay, guess what? Cell phones have an issue. Cell phones have an issue. Oops. You know what I mean? It happens, right? It's technology. It happens. But the world did not end for me. And it was only AT&T customers. There were people that were reporting that T-Mobile and Verizon customers were having issues too, but it turns out a lot of those reports from people were people who are using the other networks trying to contact the AT&T network, and that happened on there. Now, interesting enough, this only impacted AT&T core customers. And what I mean by that is that AT&T operates and owns a network, right? They own a cellular network. Same thing Verizon, same thing for AT&T or for T-Mobile. They have core customers, okay? And core customers are people that have service from AT&T or customers that have service from Verizon or have T-Mobile customers, right? And their core customers are ones that you pay AT&T or T-Mobile or Verizon, okay, each month. Those are what you call core customers. Now, all networks have what they call MVNOs. Now, MVNOs are mobile virtual network operators. Those are your like Straight Talks. Those are your Total Wireless. Those are your Dish Network, right? Yeah, Dish Network, you know, is a cellular company. Your Crickets, your all those kind of things like that on there. And then AT&T has FirstNet on top of that also too. Now, what was interesting is that FirstNet people had no issues whatsoever. They didn't have any issues whatsoever. Some of the MVNOs did not have issues, and others did. Okay, so the biggest thing to take away from this is that guess what? Cellular networks have issues. They do, right? It's going to happen. It just happens that way. But what everybody started to lose it for, and I joked around, is because when everything started to go down, guess what people had to do? They actually had to go ahead and talk and communicate with one another and actually have like a good time and conversations like how we did things in the 90s, right? But what really kind of was amazing is that everybody's like, the internet's down, the cellular network's down, this. And actually the network wasn't. There was connectivity issues within the network. The network never went down. And this kind of things, I kind of sat back and I'm like, okay, this happened a little bit ago, a couple years ago, I think it was now. If you remember, there was an issue with the DDNS attack, right? So DDNS, basically DYNS, those kind of things, is like when I go ahead and I want to search Google, right? Or YouTube. If I put in youtube.com, that's not actually the website. The website is actually a numerical address, right? An IP4 address or an IP6 address, right? So when I type in youtube.com, that translates over to a number, and then that's how you go out on the internet, right? Well, when that attack took place, when the name server, the phone book in essence, disappeared, and you couldn't, as I use the example, you want to look up Kevin Johnson, right? Well, the phone company doesn't know who Kevin Johnson is. They know Kevin Johnson and the phone book. I know for some people, they don't know what the hell a phone book is. But for those that may or may not be aware or remember, a phone book was a giant book that had the names of people that wanted to be published in there. You could have your name removed, and you could look up the names and see like, oh, Kevin Smith or John Crook or Bill Smith or Sally Joe or whoever, whatever. You could look up their names, and there was their telephone numbers. It was also a device used to go ahead and beat children in the 80s if you were naughty, or short people to sit on while they were driving the cars. But okay, anyways, that's what the name server was. Well, when that went down, people were like, oh my God, the internet went down. No, the internet did not go down. Same thing I hear people talk about all the time. Oh, when there's a horrible storm, you're going to lose access to the internet. Or the internet's going to go down. No, you lose access to these things. Alrighty? That's what it is. The internet's never going to go down. The internet can't go down. Right? It can't. It really can't. I mean, if you take out a server, There's going to be another server around the world. We're all connected via the internet, folks. We're never going to, the internet, I'm shocking, okay, I'm going to tell you this, is not a fad, okay? And the reason I say that is because that's understanding. Your access may disappear, but the network doesn't disappear. So what the hell does this have to do with everything, John? Well, what it has to do with it is because when we take a look at radio communications, yes, there is traditional radio communications. We've talked about it before where we talk about like simplex, right? Taking a radio, simplex, I'm talking from one radio to another radio. Great, grand, nifty, neato, wow, it works, but there's limitations to it, right? My handheld, in this case, is only going to be able to go as far as the power and the antenna and my height and all these other factors to make my signal go from point A to point B, right? When we don't have that capability, we need to take the next step up. The next step up is using a repeater, right? Now, a repeater can be standalone. It can be on top of the hill. You don't even have to pay like the electricity. You don't have to pay anything like that. You can actually have a repeater just doing its job, repeating, right? And it could be a green site, so it could be like solar panels or battery backup or something. You can have a repeater doing that. But guess what? That is technically a network, right? Okay, it is. It's a point of access communication. Now when I talk on a repeater, I'm keying up this radio, goes from my radio to the repeater then broadcasts back out, okay? As time has developed and technology has developed, guess what we've now started to have? We have repeater networks, we have systems, right? And guess how a majority of these systems are connected? Through internet connectivity, through IP backboning. And let me use the term IP backboning. That's going to be the better proper term. IP backboning. What we mean by that is that stuff is converted into digital signals. The digital signals, ones and zeros, data, I should say, is communicated between repeater A and repeater B or through a whole giant network of things. Now, how do I pass the data from tower site A to tower site B to tower site C and so on and so forth? Well, you can do microwaves, right? Or you can do the internet. And a lot of systems are on the internet. Amateur radio operators, okay? The majority of VHF, UHF systems you use are internet based, okay? If you are using any sort of linked repeater system that utilizes like All-Star, that utilizes like Wires X, that utilizes a C-Bridge, that utilizes a Pi Star, that utilizes any sort of like main network thing, guess what? It's using the internet, folks. And I'm going to tell you, it's using the internet. And here's the thing. If you lose connectivity to your internet, your system is going to break, right? Because if you have one repeater that's connected to multi other repeaters, and that connection between your repeater and the network goes down, right? Between your repeater and these 5 other repeaters goes down, guess what? Your little repeater is its own island. Alrighty? Now, everybody goes ahead and says, well, there's other means of communication and this and this and this and this. Well, yeah, but now we get back to the core of things. And if you are touting a network that is saying I'm connected to all these other things, well, you damn well for sure better be able to make sure that that connectivity is in place. Now, what the hell does this have to do with everything we're talking about tonight? Well, we're talking about this because what we're doing is instead of using an amateur repeater, instead of we're using a RF, in essence, repeater that then goes ahead and connects through the internet to other repeaters, we're using a different system, in essence. So, what is a network radio or a POC radio? And I like the term POC radio because what it really kind of happened is this kind of spurred out of Nextel. And I have to find it funny because when people say, oh, Nextel was a reliable network and so many people used it and stuff like that, and this and this and blah, 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 blah. Well, guess what, folks? Nextel was nothing more than a glorified cellular system. It really was. It really was. Nextel had devices that used a digital form of technology called called IDEN. Excuse me. And IDEN was basically designed to be a cellular network. It was designed to have digital voice two-way radio with the ability for you to make telephone calls. And then it kind of shifted that more people would say, hey, it's a telephone system that has two-way radios in there. Well, Nextel was ahead of its time. I've talked about that in other episodes. I miss Nextel. But push-to-talk radios are kind of that next thing on there. And what it basically is this is a network radio. And this happens to be a 4G network radio. In this radio, in the back on it, there is, underneath this little door right there, caution, do not open, non-professional, right? So don't open it if you don't know what you're doing. But underneath there is a SIM card. And in that SIM card, you put the SIM card in the radio here. And in essence, this device registers onto the cellular system. Alrighty? In essence, it does have a telephone number to it. But as you see, it's not designed to make calls, like telephone calls. What it's to do is designed for you to turn it on. Come on. Come on. Takes a moment to boot up. But as you can see, it's booting up there with a little light. And then what's going to happen is that in a moment, it's going to connect to the network like your, and I use this term on there just so I'm understanding, like your cellular network. There, just connected to the network. And in a minute, it's going to tell me what talk group I'm on. And then you are able to use it like a two-way radio. Now, people are going to say, well, it's not really a two-way radio, John. It's not really true. Network. Okay, there you go, searching network. And then it's going to connect in a moment here.
Login successfully.
There you go.
JJK,
so now, all I have to simply do is, I'll turn on the other one over here on the other side, is all I simply have to do is when I want to talk, there's a push-to-talk button on the side. And then I key up, and now all of a sudden, automatically, it's going to key up, and now I'm going to be able to communicate. Now, people say that these things are not true radios. And the reason they say it is, oh, because you're using the cellular network. But I'm going to ask you, what is the difference between a cellular network and an amateur network? If you are going into, let's say, a DMR linked network, let's say you're going into a P25 linked network, any digital voice amateur network, okay, that's linked. What is the difference between using a linked digital voice network for amateur or using a push-to-talk radio? And the answer is, there is no difference. The reason that there's no difference, and here you can even hear it in the background, the reason there is no difference is we are just using nothing more than different frequencies. So instead of per se using the VHF band of, for 2 meters, or using the 70 centimeter bands, or 900, or 220, or anything like that, or 1.2 gigs, we're just using a different type of band. It is, in essence, using the same kind of principles on there. When it goes ahead and you push the button, and you hit the key up, or you connect to the system, and you talk, you do that. The only difference between the two is that with an amateur network, you're restricted to amateur band and amateur rules. With this type of network, you're paying for service, and you could talk about, in essence, whatever you want, wherever you want, however you want, anything like that whatsoever. Okay? That's really the difference between the two. But the reason that people have, once again, this poo-poo on it attitude is because people are saying it's using the cellular networks. But it's not only using cellular networks. Push-to-talk radios require you to use a connection. Alrighty? And that's what you see here is that there's a connection to it. Now the connection could be by the internet. It could be a connection to whatever you want it to be, right? So you can have a dedicated device that connects into the cellular network, but then that network then translates over to the internet. Okay? So you don't necessarily have to have connection to a cellular network. You could just have connection to the internet. And that's the concept of it. You have an access point, much like an amateur repeater system. If we are to go ahead in this case here, basically say, listen, the cellular network tower we're seeing here, if that was an amateur radio tower, guess what? It's going to be connected in the same regards, in the same manner. The only difference, once again, is we're going to be using a different set of frequency bands and a different way to access the system. Much like if I'm out of range of that cellular tower in my house, what can I do? I can go over to a Wi-Fi hotspot, right? Hotspot, the Wi-Fi in my house. Amateur-wise, oh, I'm out of range of my local repeater. Well, what can I do? Well, in my house, I can go to my hotspot, which is the equivalency of a Wi-Fi router, right? If these things run off cellular and Wi-Fi networks, I can't hit the cellular tower. I move over to the Wi-Fi in my house, which then allows it to use. If I'm using my amateur radio, okay, and I can't hit the repeater directly anymore, I can go to a WiresX device, a hotspot device, or whatever the little device is. I'm still transmitting on the amateur bands into this device. I'm still transmitting Wi-Fi signals into the Wi-Fi router, but guess what? We're still connected in that network, okay? We still are. Now, what's even more interesting about the push-to-talk radios is that, guess what? Some of them are, in essence, ad hoc networks themselves. Alrighty? And what I mean by ad hoc networks themselves is that you don't necessarily have to connect to a server. You may be able to put it into an ad hoc mode, and this radio on a Wi-Fi or WAN LAN network may be able to connect over to this one at the same time. Now, as long as the networks are bridged, guess what? I'm keying up talking on this one on the Wi-Fi network, and it's going to this one directly on the Wi-Fi network. And if I need to expand further and further, I can do that further and further. Some of these push-to-talk radios even have the ability to do Wi-Fi direct. And what I mean by that is the same sort of Wi-Fi direct you have in your house with, like, let's say newer TVs or stuff. Where if I'm going to go ahead and take my cell phone and I want to cast to my TV, right, so it's a bigger screen, I can go into Wi-Fi direct mode, and using Wi-Fi bands, I'm going to connect to my TV. And when I connect to my TV, what's going to happen then is I'm going to be like, oh, look at that. Here we go. Boom. It's going to go ahead and connect up to my TV using the Wi-Fi frequencies, but not actually going through the Wi-Fi network. Okay. So that's where this whole thing kind of comes into play of saying, well, POC radios, are no good and that kind of thing. No, they are. Now, one of the advantages that a POC radio will always have over a straight traditional RF kind of operation is that a POC radio is not limited by distance, and it's not limited by power out, right? So remember, if I wanted to communicate, I have to be within range of this radio or range of the repeater, or have to be within the same communication network. So if it's a digital radio, I have to be going into a network that the other user on the other end can go ahead and hear on there. So that creates some technicality sometimes, right? Because if I'm on vacation, let's say, and I bring my amateur radio with, and I can't access the connection that, let's say, my dad or my wife or my friends are using, right? Even though I have access to repeaters and stuff, if those repeaters may not be on the same network as those that are on there that I want to talk to, well, guess what? I can't communicate with them, okay? POC radios eliminate that issue, right? As long as the POC radio is connected to the internet. Now I'm talking about a server-based POC system. As long as I can connect and have some sort of IP connectivity, whether that's the little SIM card in here, whether that's using the Wi-Fi network on here. Now, as you can hear, I'm talking through a network, through a systems. So in this case, as long as I have the SIM card, as long as I have access to a network point, right, an access point, then I'm good. That's where I think POC radios defeat a lot of the traditional stuff. If we look at it from a business, commercial, or even like a public safety kind of thing on there, because the concept of push-to-talk over cellular or POC radios or stuff like that is coming a long ways, folks. It's not in its infancy, okay? It really is kind of in what I would say the toddler or child age right now. And I'll give you a good example. Chicago PD, right? If you watch the TV show, not talking about the actual police department, you would talk to the show. You always go ahead and you see Voight and his team, they're always holding up and talking into their telephones like that on there because they have a push-to-talk app on there. Push-to-talk apps, which we've talked about like Zello and all them, are in essence a POC or PTToC kind of application. But instead of having a separate device that transmits on there, they're using your cellular device. But once again, same concept. As long as I have a data access point into the network, I can go ahead and communicate on there. Now, there's different things out there. With the craze of POC radio starting to take off, it really is starting to get to this thing of like, well, what's that purpose? What's this going to go ahead and be for? And I'll give you some instant use cases about POC because we're actually talking about POC. So the first instant use case is going to be a agency or a department or a business or something that needs communications, but needs something that's in essence portable, easy to carry, and can go great distances. Now, a lot of people are saying, well, you have handheld radios. Correct. Once again, though, handheld radios either go radio to radio or radio into a connection point or system. So what I mean by that is like a repeater or a network system of repeaters. But if you can't hit those repeaters and you can't talk radio to radio, that's not going to do you any good. So I live over here near the Twin Cities. So there's a lot of commercial networks out here, right? But if Bill works for Mark's Trucking Company and Bill is taking a trip across the state and he's leaving the Twin Cities and he's headed down to Chicago, okay, he's going to drive through Wisconsin, guess what? Eventually, Bill is going to be out of the range of that network. So you got the little network up here, right? And Bill's going to be, hey, I'm going down to Chicago, which is kind of on my screen here, like down here, right? There may not be a network that he can contact back in, right? Well, then you say, well, John, what about cell phones? Well, we'll get to that in a moment, okay? But once he's out of that two-way radio network, it's not going to work. However, with push-to-talk networks, you have that ability, okay? You have that ability because as long as there's connectivity, he can go ahead and communicate back. So with that being said, that's where you need to now go ahead and start to take a place and saying, okay, let's take a look at this. So that is going to be better now because now you're not limited by the geographical restrictions of RF properties of that network. You're going to go ahead and be able to communicate across greater distances. And it's not just across the state. It could be nationwide. It could be whatever. I've been using personal or POC radios with my family for business purposes. You name it. Whatever it may be. Just idle chit chat. Hey, I'm in the car. I'm on the way home. Okay, hey, I'm this and this and this and this, right? And I've been using that, and it's great because if I'm out of range, okay, I still have a means to communicate. If the person I'm talking to doesn't have an amateur radio license, right, then I can communicate. I can conduct a business on them and everything like that on there. Now, a lot of people saying, well, John, then everybody has to have a POC radio. And that's actually not correct. POC radios and the technology have started to develop to be able to have interconnections. Now, we did an episode before about talking about gateways. Alrighty? Now, what I want you to do here is use this concept here. And as you see on this tower over here where it says cellular network, right where it says internet here, pretend that doesn't say cellular network anymore. Pretend that's an RF tower. So now what you have is you have this mobile user in this little truck here, and instead of using a cellular network, let's say that's going over on business frequencies, so VHF or UHF or 800, whatever the case may be. Now that's hitting that RF tower, and that RF tower then is feeding that into the internet and going through and connecting over to the POC system. And what this really kind of does then is this starts to map talk groups of a POC network to RF talk groups. So if you have a DMR system, maybe they have two talk groups on the system. Maybe they have a local talk group, and then maybe they have a business or a roaming talk group. And what that roaming talk group would be is that they switch to that talk group, and then it accesses the repeater. But then not only are they talking through the repeater, but then that roaming talk group might go out to other RF connected repeaters and then cross over to the talk groups in the radio here. So for example, I have two talk groups. I have my personal one.
Correct.
So there we go. So I'll turn it, do it one more time again. Whoop.
No group. Correct.
So there's my personal family talk group. And then this is the JJK talk group.
JJK fleet.
So now what I do is if I want to go ahead and talk to someone privately or within there, I would turn it to my personal one. And now we can go ahead and talk, and it's only going to go over the POC network. Okay? Same thing out on the RF side. The people out there on the RF network, they're going ahead and they're talking, and it's all through the RF system on the network. But now if I want to go and say, you know what? I need to talk to Susie. And I know Susie's on a two-way radio, but she's not on a POC radio. So now I change it to
JJK fleet.
the fleet talk group. She has her radio, two-way radio, on the fleet talk group now, or scanning the fleet talk group. And all I'm going to simply do is I'm going to take and I'm going to key up. And when I key up, what that's going to do is it's going to key up all the other push-to-talk radios. Okay, then it's going to go through the interconnection or the gateway, and then it's going to go out to the RF network and then key up that talk group. And now what I did is now I have interoperability. Now I have interconnectability. Okay, so now if we go back to that example, okay, where we were using Bill and Mark, now Bill is headed on down to Chicago, right? So Bill's on his push-to-talk radio, but when Bill goes ahead and keys up, he can then stay on the push-to-talk network, or if it's set up, because not everybody has an interconnect gateway, now he can go ahead and connect on this push-to-talk radio, which then keys up the RF network. Okay? And that's how that happens. That's how that works. That's how POC radios, push-to-talk over cellular, PTToC radios, kind of heighten that, kind of bring that operational level of things back up to a greater level, to a greater tier. Because however you have it set up, whether it's POC to POC radio or POC to RF radio, you have that there. Communications is always going to take place. Now, what are the limitations? Well, once again, looking at the limitations, they have to have or be in range of a cellular network or have internet connectivity. The reason I say, once again, stressing internet connectivity is because guess what? Let's say Bill stays at a hotel that has poor cellular signal in his room. Okay? And let's say he's told to have the radio with him. Okay? Well, if he has poor internet signal, he can hop on the Wi-Fi network. Okay? Or a lot of cars these days are coming with internet built into them. He could hop on the internet there, or he could use the internet on his cell phone, or he can use the internet at Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts or wherever, right? There is connectivity. Once again, he just needs to find a way to get into the network. Now, the opposite, once again, on the other side, if we take a look at the RF network there, so we have the disadvantage of being geographically limited by RF, but then also, too, is you also have to make sure that the system isn't busy. If you have a system with a lot of people on there, it's going to get busy. You may have that missed communication on there. So are there positives and negatives to both sides? Yes, there is. But there's not going to be one undeniable goalkeeper in this kind of in this thing. There's not going to be one person that's going to walk away with the award. It's really not. It's all going to be based on the connectivity or what you're attempting to do. And with that, you know what really bends my antenna? And you know what really bends my antenna? How about nothing? Because this antenna is pretty fixed. It's a 4G antenna. It really doesn't bend at all. I mean, I'm really tweaking on it. But anyways, what really bends my antenna is that we have this ideology, this theology. I'm going to say it. Yes, theology. I know it's kind of not probably the proper term to use. But no, because I think there are some people that really hardcore believe that if you utilize a cellular network, if you utilize a public network, then you're going to have disruption and in a true emergency, the network's going to fail, and it was proven by AT&T. No, folks. It really wasn't. It really, really, really wasn't. Okay? Cellular networks have hiccups all the time. And you experience hiccups with a cellular network a majority of the time. How many times have you been in your house, in your basement, in your place of work, in a fire station, in an ambulance station, in a police department, or something like that, that you can't, or a mall or something that you can't use your cell phone? And if you say you never have, you are full of it. Because, you are only good into the network based upon your connectivity. That's not for cellular. That's for RF in general. Your telephone is RF. There's no strings attached. Ooh, okay? Your two-way radio, folks, is only connected via RF. Once again, no strings attached, okay? POC radios, same thing. You're only good in RF. The resilience of communication comes down to connectivity. How well can you access the network? And I know people go ahead and I know people say all the time, oh, this and this and this and this and this. Yeah, you know what? In a time of emergency when the networks go down, everybody's going to have their own little tweak and way to go ahead and do things. Some people say, well, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use, two-way radios. That's great, but it's not going to achieve what you want it to do. The plan that a lot of people base it on is based upon what their networks can do without any issue. Whether you're connected through a public network or whether you're connected through a private IP system, whether you're connected through microwaves, whether you're connected whatever, there's always going to be a gap. Anytime there is nothing physical, you run the risk of failure. And even with physical, you run the risk of failure. Okay? Nothing is going to be 100%. The biggest thing is going to be is that you have redundancy. You have a primary plan. You have a secondary plan. You have a tertiary plan. Okay? My degree is in emergency management. Okay? That's where I've had a lot of my studies. That's where I've had a lot of experience in my life. And the one thing is that when you're using your primary means, when the primary means go down, which it will, your secondary means better work. And if your secondary means isn't going to go ahead and work in place of the primary, then you better have a tertiary. And if your tertiary can't take care of the secondary and the primary issues, then you're going to have issues, regardless of what happened. Now, your secondary and your tertiary means do not need to go ahead and be the new everyday norm. No, it needs to be something that can supplement the primary norm. Okay? And a good example, when we talk about RF side of things, right? When I'm on duty with the ambulance, right? My primary means of communication in the day-to-day is dispatch. When I need secondary or non-vital communications, I use local channels. I use tactical channels. I use those kind of things. That's that radio to radio, those kind of things, right? If primary goes down, then I have to revert to secondary, okay? And then if primary and secondary goes down, what's my tertiary? What's my backup on there, okay? You could also go ahead and say it's the main, the alternate one, and then even alternate two, okay? But you look at that. That's for RF usage. Same thing goes ahead and goes for non-RF usage, is what some people believe, or cellular networks or stuff. They don't believe that it's RF. We look at cellular phones differently. I don't know why, but the mentality we have is that we look at it differently, okay? Once again, your cell phone goes down. What's the backup plan? Oh, well, it's going to be radio. Okay, can radio still do what you need it to do? Sometimes people go like, well, no, it's not. So think of it as this way. What if it is I'm in my basement, if I can't reach the cell network, primary, what's my backup? Oh, Wi-Fi. Oh, okay, cool. You know what I mean? So those are things that you have to do. POC radios are, in essence, in the same design plan of whatsoever. If anything, the advantage POC networks have is that they can hop on any network anywhere without really any sort of additional types of infrastructure needed, right? If I can't hit the repeater, I now have to find another means of interception. Okay, what I mean by interception is something that's going to now take my signal and forward it to the network. Whether that's another repeater, whether that's a hotspot, whether that's an access node, whatever the case may be. Okay, and I'm not just talking amateur, I'm talking anything. If you can't hit the repeater directly, now you need to find another means to get into that repeater system, into that network. Okay? Some people's plans are to run an app on their phone, right? But guess what? When we start getting into that, everything we complain about as being, oh, cellular networks, public networks, guess what? Is what you're relying upon. They're not bad networks, folks. They're not bad things to have. Don't feel that they are bad things to have, but plan and use it accordingly. Okay? POC radios are, in essence, radios. They operate a little bit differently. They have different characteristics. It is more dummy proof. I don't have to worry about frequencies. I don't have to worry about anything like that. Cell phones, same thing. Radios, yeah, I do need to worry about frequencies. I do that. Now, am I saying POC radios beat RF radios components and sides down? No, it's not. But there is an equal thing between the two. And I think the best thing we can do is break that mentality and go ahead and saying, oh, when all else fails, amateur radio, or when all else fails, it's always two-way radios. No, it's not. It's going to be a mix and a blend of the two depending on the situation. And that's what really bends my antenna. Alrighty. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in. I hope this was kind of a good program for you. Kind of helps you understand what POC radios are, how they work, how they're not just 100% just cellular stuff. They really aren't. They do have different aspects of things in there. They do operate in different core and contexts on there. Once again, same thing about cellular networks. Yes, it's easy in design because non-technical people need to use that type of network. So until then, everybody, I don't know where you're at. I know we had a great warm weekend and then we had snow. Hopefully it's going to get better soon. But I want everybody to stay safe. I want everybody to take care. Weather's getting better is what the main point of that was. So if you're going to have some cigars, sit back and enjoy them. And until then, take care, everybody.